What's going on, guys? It's Porrick here for another knives and tools video, and today we're going to talk about notches. Now, notches are a really important thing to understand. They're just as important a skill set and a thing to have in your arsenal as, let's say, the knots that we would have looked at in previous videos. They're going to help you to construct your camp. You can build camp furniture with them. You can build primitive traps. You can, on a larger scale, if you wanted to, you could build like a log cabin. They're going to help you in making primitive fire sets and things like that. So they're really useful things to know. And there are a few basic notches that we can be learning and practicing at home. And so the way that we practice this is a simple thing called a Kochanski Try Stick, where you simply take a straight stick and you try a number of different notches along that stick. And we're going to go through these today. We're going to look at the names of the notches, what they're used for, and also how they're constructed within a tri-stick. The Kochanski Try Stick was invented by a man named Kochanski, who very sadly passed away last year at the age of 79. Sadly, I never got a chance to meet Morris. I know a lot of people, a lot of my friends have, and he was an absolute legend in his own right. He is one of the pioneers of modern bushcraft, and if you are looking for a book to add to your collection, I would recommend looking up Morris Kochanski's bushcraft book. But this is something that he taught his students, and it's something that's quite well regarded now, or well known in the outdoor world, as a way to teach kids and other people how to implement notches into their skill set. Another good way to use the Kochanski Try Stick is a way to test a knife. So when I'm testing out a new knife, one of the things that I will do is to try out a few different types of notches. Some of the more difficult ones that maybe have tighter angles, things that are a little bit more difficult to construct, things that implement awkward kind of maybe knife grips or cutting angles. And it's just a really useful and good way to see if your knife is going to perform what you require it to. So it's a good way to use your knife in that way as well. So if you're picking a knife to do this, we are going to be batoning through this. You can also use a saw if you want, but for the sake of this and in the true spirit of the Kochanski Try Stick, we're going to do it with just a knife. So I would recommend using something that you can probably hit the back of. A carving knife would be amazing for this, like a 106 if you also had a saw. But if you were only using the knife itself, then I would recommend something that you can hit the back of. Nothing too large. Maybe a Mora companion would be more than capable of this job. So just to bear that in mind when we are constructing this. So the first part of this is the very top, and that is the stake end. That's a very simple, it's just all we've done is simply chamfer around the top of the Try Stick itself. And there's a number of reasons why we would do that. If we were constructing a tent peg, for example, chamfering around the edge is going to stop this wood from splitting out when you're hammering down on it with your axe or something, or maybe a rock. It just tightens everything up and brings it to more of a point. So when you are hammering, it's not going to break and split out and just kind of flare out. So it's a really useful thing to be able to do. Super simple, nothing too complex about that. It's just something that is implemented and is used. Another way that you could use this, if you rounded it off a little bit more into more like, let's say, a half sphere, is how you construct the tip of your bow drill spindle. So a bow drill spindle, as you know, actually almost looks exactly like that, where you've got a point on the top where your bearing block is going to be, and then at the bottom you're going to have something more like a half sphere that's going to go into your harpboard. The idea of a bow drill spindle is that you want as little friction on the top as possible and as much friction on the bottom as possible. So obviously the top is going to be pointed where your bearing block is in it, and it's not going to be, there's not going to be too much friction. And all the friction is going to be taken here onto your harpboard. So again, that is something that is important to be able to understand how to do, and we will go through that. And it's the knife grips that I use to make this. The next notch we have here is the stake notch, or latch notch. It is used basically for making tent pegs, and it's a really extremely useful knot to be able to understand. If you was to straighten this out, it's supposed to have this on a curve, so it would be more like, if we had it more like this, then it would be used in making figure 4 traps and other sorts of deadfall traps. But with the curved inner on the inside here, it's called a stake notch, and we can make that will very easily with this on the top, a stake on the bottom, and this is a really effective tent peg. Your paracord will go around here and latch in here, and this part goes into the ground, and there's no way that that's going to come out for you. So again, that's a really good knot to understand how to use. The next one is a V-notch. A V-notch again is extremely useful for bow drill. So on your bow drill harpboard, understanding how to construct a V-notch is going to be important, because that's where all the ember or the coal falls from your harpboard and collects, and essentially that's what creates the hot coal that you're going to blow into flame. So the V-notch again is a really important one to understand how to use. Also, another use of the V-notch is in the creation of toggles, so on a much smaller scale. So obviously this is quite deep, and I've created this quite large for demonstration purposes. If you were to do this in a toggle, it of course wouldn't need to be this deep, but something that's on a much smaller scale that allows your paracord or your bank line to latch into, and it's going to make your toggle much more effective. You're not going to have your paracord falling off that toggle then. The next notch that we're going to look at is called the cabin notch. The name, I suppose, speaks for itself. It is used in the construction of log cabins, and it is a way that people will cut into the logs, and then they will stack the next one into it, so they sit snugly inside each other. On a smaller scale though, we can use it to make pack frames, so a makeshift backpack. If you had 3 long pieces of hazel or something straight like this, you could construct a very effective backpack using a square notch to slot them all into each other, and they will lock. So great notch to understand how to use also. Then we have the bail notch, or just the pot hanger notch as I call it, and it essentially does what it says in the tin. It's used to hang pots over the fire when you're cooking. Your paracord or your wire can go over here. You can also do it where if you had this on one side and then on the opposite side you had a number of them going down in the opposite direction, you can adjust the height of your pot then over the fire when you're cooking. So that's a really fun one, and it's a really useful one to understand how to use as well. So we're going to go through that one. And then finally we've just got a stake point on the end. This is more, I suppose, to practice at the power cuts or the chest lever, which we will go through, and it's a way that you use your knife to take a lot of material off really effectively. So this can be used for, as I said, for the top of your spindle on a bow drill set. You can use it as a tent peg. There's many reasons why you might need a stake. So that's it. That's all the notches that we're going to practice today. Of course, there are so many more notches to understand out there, but these are the most basic ones and the most useful ones, and the ones that I use personally more often than not when I'm trying to construct something in my camp. If you Google Kochanski Try Stick, you will see that there are some really complicated ones out there that people spend so much time doing, and they're pretty cool, and so they are worth checking out. But for the sake of us and our practicing today, we are going to focus on these 1, 2, 3, 4 basic notches, and then we're going to also look at the 2 ends and how to construct them. So let's get a blank stick and we'll start. And you guys can, of course, try along with me. If you got a stick, we can practice this one together. So let's go. So it's a little bit windy here in Inmount today. So what I've done is I've actually gone into the ship that we have here, into the bottom deck where it's somewhat sheltered. So apologies for the echo if there's a bit of sound discrepancy. But we're going to finish off the Try Stick today. And but before we do that, I want to kind of quickly go over some knife safety. So obviously when you're using a knife, it's an extremely sharp tool, and it's something that is not to be taken lightly. That it's very easy to mess up if you're tired, if you're hungry, if you've been drinking, if it's dark. There's lots of variables involved in this. So when you're doing things like this, it's important that you're not tired or hungry, it's not too dark, as I said, and you haven't been drinking alcohol. And I suppose that goes without saying. Another thing to bear in mind as well is cutting yourself. It happens all the time. We cut our hands, particularly when we're carving spoons and things. I don't think I've ever been at a carving class where somebody hasn't cut their hand or sliced a finger open or something like that. So normally they're easy enough to fix. They're small things. But on a more serious note, what you really need to be aware of is the arteries that run between your legs here. So on the inside of each of your legs is a femoral artery, and if you slice that, well, this is called the blood triangle essentially, or the triangle of death. If you were to slice a femoral artery inside your leg, you would bleed out and you would be dead within minutes. So stay away from inside your legs, and I can't stress that enough. If you're carving, when you're sitting down, you should either be out here past your knees, or up here, or to your side like this. Never ever be working between your legs. It's just so easy to just slip and to accidentally and slice the inside of your leg, and you're dead essentially. So just to not take that lightly. So with that safety disclaimer out of the way, I think we can probably move on to some of the tools that we're going to use today. So first obviously is the knife. This is a Mora Knife, a Mora knife companion, and this was actually my first blade that I ever had when I started out in bushcraft. Not this exact one, but this exact model. Really cheap but really good quality steel from Mora in Sweden. They are great to have just, you know, in a pack. You can have them lying around, and because they are so cheap, I think they retail for maybe about 12-13 euro. Because they're so cheap, you can have them around, and you're always going to have a really good quality blade at hand. And this is more than capable of achieving what we need for it to do today. So fantastic blade. And I know that we did say that we're only going to use a knife in this video, but I think it would be useful to you guys as well to see how some of these notches can be achieved using a saw as well. So what I'm using today is the Silky Gomboy. Silky is a Japanese company, and these are made in Japan. Really good quality arborist's tool actually, so they are a professional tool, and they're really good quality, like extremely good. The blades are not cheap to replace, but if you're looking for a really good quality folding saw, then Silky are definitely going to be your go-to. This is actually a pull saw, which means that the teeth on the blade go backwards, so the cutting action is achieved on the backstroke or pull stroke. So pushing forward doesn't actually make it cut, it's just when you're pulling back. And it is a technique that takes a bit of getting used to if you're used to using a different type of saw. And what tends to happen is people seem to snap the blade because they're pushing forward too hard, or they're trying to push in as a cut. So it's just something that you do need to get used to using, but when you do, it's a fantastic tool. The reason why the teeth go backwards and it's a pull saw is because it's designed for arborists. They'll often be trying to cut things at a height, you know, like branches and things. So pushing forward doesn't get a lot of strength, but pulling down makes it a lot easier. So it's specifically designed for that. So fantastic tool. So we're going to use that today to make some of these notches. And then finally, I'm using a baton, or just like a mallet. This is for basically hitting the back of your knife. I made this. Well, actually, I didn't make this particular one, but we've made these in the past on classes and things, and they're really useful to have for hitting 10 pegs into the ground, or just to use on the back of your knife. I also use one in spoon carving as well, so useful thing to have. So let's take our stick and our knife, and let's get started. Obviously, as I said, you know, stay out of this triangle here. This is definitely a no-go area, so I'm going to go here, and we'll move our way down the stick and replicate what we had already achieved. So the first thing we're going to do is do this chamfering on the top. As we said, this is so that things don't split out on you when you're hammering, and it's also good for a bow drill divot or a bow drill spindle. And there's a couple of different ways that you could achieve that. You could do a very standard pull grip like this, and we could do something like this, or we could do a chest lever, or we could employ a number of them. For today, I think The first grip that I'm going to show you, because it's one of the most widely used, is, I'm not sure exactly what the name of this is, but it's employed a lot in spoon carving. So what you do essentially is, normally you would hold a knife like so. This is called a full grip. So rather than holding a knife in a full grip, what you're going to do is you're kind of turn the knife around backwards. And I know that's kind of feels a little bit awkward at first, and it feels a bit unusual. So the cutting end is going to be facing towards you, towards the middle of your hand here. And what we're going to do is we're going to keep the knife sort of clamped like this, and then we're going to, almost as if you're peeling an apple, but not pulling towards your thumb here, because if you're pulling towards your thumb, you are going to cut your thumb. So that's not what we're looking for. What we're looking for is for it to come into the inside of your hand here. So you're just kind of creating this sort of motion. So if we employ that on the top of this stick, my thumb is here, so it's not up here where it can be cut, it's back here. And then all we're going to do is we're going to just employ that motion all the way around. So when the knife is coming backwards, it's going in that way and it's not going towards your thumb. So we just move ourselves around and just pull, remove, like that. And we can go a bit deeper if we want to. And my thumb is taking a lot of that pressure. So I'm using the fulcrum almost of my thumb here to create a bit of pressure to actually get that, cut. So that is not the tidiest, but for demonstration purposes you get the point. So that's a good way to achieve that one. If you wanted to, you could also just do downward ones. So you could probably just, in a full grip, so not with the knife that way, but with the knife that way, you could just do that. You're not going to get as much finesse with that one, but it's a more powerful cut, and maybe if the wood is not as green as this and it's a bit tougher, that might be a better way of achieving that. But this is nice and soft green wood, it's a piece of hazel, so it's easy for me just to remove, just like that. So that's the top. Then what we're going to do is we're going to move on to our tent peg notch that we talked about. So basically what's employed here is a flat and then a curve. So maybe for this one I will baton, which is hitting the back of the knife. I'm not going to do that on the video because it'll just shake the hell out of the screen and it'll look kind of strange. But essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to place my knife down like this, and I'm going to go in like not even halfway, maybe like a third or so deep. So what I do is I place my knife down and I take this mallet and then hit the back of the knife. It only needs to be tapped, but I'll do that now and then we'll come back. So as you can see here, I've hit the back of my knife with the mallet and brought it into the stick, so you can see that it's straight, and it's gone in not too far. We can always increase that as we want to, but essentially this just starts the notch for us and makes it easier rather than trying to just push in. So from there, with that notch in place, or with that line in place, I'm going to start back about here and just start carving inwards. And the way that we're going to do that is a thumb push. So how this works is you hold the knife in again like a full grip, so not this way the way we were doing it, but like this. And then with your thumb on the back of the knife, holding this, all the pressure comes from the push. So the blade you should never really be using this hand to employ any force, because that's going to lead to slips and things like that. Where the power is coming from is your thumb on the back, and this hand is simply holding the knife. It is an awkward thing to kind of get used to at first, and it feels strange to not be trying to like pull with this, but honestly all the pressure and all the power should be coming from the thumb on the opposite hand, the one that's holding the stick. So what we do is we place it down and then we just push inwards until we meet that line that we've created. And just sort of scooping inwards, so not just going straight in or straight down, but kind of trying to achieve a bit of a curve like this. And it does take a bit of practice, but you will get it. And just kind of keep going in, and just be careful when you actually get to the line, because what can happen is if you employ too much force, it will actually just break and slip out. And then what we can also do is to actually, like, so I've got this bit here that I've used, and I've gotten to the end of where we put that line in. I can actually just take my knife on the top here and just press down, and if it's sharp enough, it should just take that stuff clean off. And then, so essentially that's how we create that notch. Again, I'm not going to do the entire thing for the sake of this video, but you get the point as to how that notch is going to get created, so you can start to see there how we can create it. So if you need this deeper, we can go back to batoning, and we can take our knife and we can dig that in deeper, and we can continue to make this scoop out. Another good way to make this scoop actually is something that I employ a lot in spoon carving, and it is a bit difficult to get used to, but it is a useful one. So it's similar to what we were doing earlier, and the knife is like this, but what you actually put your thumb on the underneath here, and then you take here, and then you, with kind of the bottom end of the knife here, you would again do that same motion. And it's very effective for creating these kind of curves, these curved cuts. I use this on the corners of a spoon, so if you imagine where the bowl of the spoon is, where the bowl meets the handle, there's a curve there, and it's a really good and effective way of achieving that. So that's our first notch, and for the sake of this demonstration, I think that's about as far as we need to go with this one. So this is our original, and this is what we're creating. As you can see from the side, pretty much the same thing. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is the V-notch. As we said, this is a notch that's used in creating toggles. It's also something that's used in a bow drill, hardboard, and it's essentially, as the name suggests, just a V. And I think for this one what we'll do is we'll use the saw, and I'll show you guys how to effectively use a saw to create this V-notch very quickly. So all we basically have to do is, what we can do is we're going to create a line, not too deep, as I said, maybe just under halfway down the stick, or into the stick rather, and then what we are going to do then is take the knife and progressively make push cuts to create a V. So I'm going to put that line in the stick now, using this saw. So as I said, I can just put it in here to get a bit of grip on it. As I said, this is a pull saw, so all the power comes from the pull. And you have to be kind of careful not to go too deep. These saws are a lot more powerful than you might think they're going to be at first. So just to be careful that you don't go too deep, and just be keeping an eye on how deep you're actually going. So that's pretty deep already. That's basically essentially halfway in. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take our knife and progressively make a V in that. And the same cutting technique is used for this as we did for making these. Is the thumb push. And basically all we have to do is go on each side of this and kind of go in at an angle until we've got a V that we're happy with, and then we can tidy it up using this guy as we did before. So so let me put one side of the V in, and you can see how that's starting to look. So there's one half of the V, and it almost looks similar to this one. But what we're going to do is, so we've basically made push cuts, thumb pushes in this way, and we're going to do the same with this side now to make it to make the V. So there's our V now. The V is in there, and as I was saying to you, what you can do is you can use this grip that we showed you earlier with kind of towards the back of the knife, and just to tidy it up so it just looks a little bit neater. V-notch achieved. The next one we are going to look at is the cabin notch, or square notch. You guys remember, this is the one that is used to make log cabins, to stack the logs, but it's also a really useful way of making a pack frame, a makeshift backpack for yourself, where you would create these notches, and then all the pieces of wood would slide into each other. So let's make that. And again, I think we can probably use the saw for that one. And yeah, let's keep going. So with our saw, what we're going to do is we're going to make the two lines, just make two lines in where there's two sides of the notch are going to be, and then we'll use our knife to carve out the middle bit. So again, just being really careful that you don't go too deep with these, because it's very easy with these saws to cut too deep. And there we have our two lines. I'm not sure if you can see that or not. But now what we're going to do essentially with a line here and a line here, what we're going to do is we're going to take out this middle bit with our knife. And again, all we're going to use is just push cuts. Push cut is really effective for doing this kind of thing, for accurate, controlled pushes that aren't allowing your knife to slip everywhere all the time. And it's just a safety thing as well. But let us take out those middle bits. And the best way to do that is not to try and take everything off at once and trying to take huge big cuts. You're going to make mistakes, you're going to break things if you do it that way. Be patient and take out small bits at a time. It's also, if you're not used to using a knife too much and your hand is getting sore, it's a much easier way of taking, just whittling away smaller pieces rather than trying to take huge chunks away. So with that in mind, removing the material from this, what I would do is I would start in the middle and just take off a little bit at a time on each side, and just keep moving yourself from side to side until you're happy with what you've achieved. So let's do that now, and I will show you guys the result. So what I'm doing here is I'm moving the stick backwards and forwards, turning it around to take off one side and then taking off the other side. And that way then, as you're removing smaller pieces at a time, you're not trying to, as we said, take off a huge chunk and potentially making a mistake or cutting yourself or hurting your hand, because it actually employs a lot of hand strength, more than you might imagine, to do some of these things. And your hand can get tired if it's not something that you're used to doing. So I've just kept going and removing some of that material, and essentially what I've created now is this square gap in the stick, and maybe we can even look at how these might fit together. So you can imagine, you can see how those would fit together if you were creating something like a pack. Obviously this top notch is too large for this stick, but if you were measuring this up, you would make that notch so that that piece of wood would fit exactly into the space that you were creating. But basically it's a way to create sticks that can lock together. Another thing to bear in mind when we are doing this carving, and to ensure that you're getting a smooth cut, but also you're not making more work for yourself, is considering the grain direction. And you always want to be cutting what we call downhill. So if you can imagine, and I have here a bunch of postcards just as an example, but if you can imagine that this would be your piece of wood, and if you take the pages, if we do the same for a book, if you take the pages of a book and you kind of push them like this, like downhill, imagine this was your knife, you're going downhill, you're not going to meet any resistance, you're going to get a smooth cut. But if you were trying to carve uphill, you would essentially, you'd be getting caught on the pages and it would be going upwards. So you always want to make sure that your knife is carving downhill. And let me think of an example of this would be this, for example, this first notch. If I was trying to carve this upwards, it would be really difficult. My knife would be getting caught and it would be getting all jagged, and you'd be getting all these lines, and you know, it would be really gross. And that's one of the things that comes only with practice, is understanding that if you're meeting a lot of resistance and your knife is chattering, it probably means that you're trying to go uphill and the grain is just not agreeing with you. So if it's not working for you, what's usually a good thing to do is turn it around, see if you can go downwards as opposed to upwards, and hopefully that will help you. But I often see it particularly with spoon carvers, when people start carving spoons and they're not familiar with this concept and they're trying to carve things that are going upwards, and it's just making them look really, really scratchy on them. And so the solution for that is usually to change, if you can, the direction that you're carving, to go downhill rather than uphill. So it's definitely worth bearing that in mind when you are doing these. And the last notch that we're going to do is the pot hanger that we looked at. So this one is an interesting one in the sense that the way in which you achieve this is actually not what you would imagine it kind of looks like at the beginning. And the way that we achieve this is essentially creating an X. First of all, we're going to create an X in this stick. So we'll baton this one. Again, I'm not going to do it on the video because it's going to create a lot of camera shake. But essentially what we're going to do is we're going to create an X. So we're going to put the knife in, we're going to baton it in, we're going to take the knife out, and we're going to put an X on the other side, put a line on the other side to create an X. So let's do that now, and I'll come back to you guys. So I'm not sure if you can see this, but what I've done is basically, as I said, taken this and baton an X into it. And what we're going to do is we're going to remove a lot of this material. And if you can imagine, the X is in 4 sections, so 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to remove 3 of them except the one at the bottom. So the one at the bottom is essentially going to be where what ends up being the hook. So what we do is we take this X, and then again with thumb pushes we're just going to remove all the bits around that section, and it's kind of difficult to explain. So I'll just go ahead and do this one, and you can kind of see what I'm trying to achieve. So I'm pushing in, and as I'm pushing in I'm stopping at kind of the center of the X. And what should happen, because I've made those notches, or made those indents rather, as I'm carving this stuff should just be falling away. And what we can do is, as I said, we can turn the stick around if we need to go more downhill. The action for this is very similar to the first one that we did, like this, except instead of meeting that straight end, you're actually meeting the point that we've created with the X. So you can kind of see how this is starting to come together. So definitely not the tidiest pot hanger knot I've ever made, but you can see for the sake of this demonstration how this is achieved. So as we said, we had an X and we removed the material to allow just the last bottom quarter of the X to kind of remain, and we've kind of curved ourselves inwards and in and around the back of it there to kind of create this little hook. So that's the pot hanger notch. And then finally, the very last thing we're going to do is just put a stake point on the end of this. And I will show you two different ways to do this, because there's two knife grips that I think are really important to know how to use, and they're going to be very beneficial to you, not just for making notches but just in general. So I'm going to go over those with you. And the first one that we're going to do is a reinforced knee grip here. So basically what we're doing is, rather than pushing the knife or doing any sort of action with the knife is going to stay in place, and what we're going to do is we're going to use this hand to actually pull this stick backwards, and then in that way then we're creating a lot of force, and this force is very useful for creating things like this, and for removing a lot of material from your stick or whatever project you're working on. So basically what I do is I take the bend in my, while I'm holding the knife in a full grip, the crook of my hand here is going to rest in the kind of the soft part underneath your kneecap. So it's kind of essentially created like this. The knife stays in place and hold it in a proper tight grip, and then we're going to take our stick and we're going to pull that away, and what's going to happen is all the material is going to be removed this way. It's a really safe way of working as well, because the knife isn't moving, and the less your knife is moving, the better for things like this. So what we can do is we can just pull that back, and it's just a really easy way of creating a lot of force, and a very safe way to remove material. There are variations of this where you put the back of the knife in the crook of your knee. That's also a way to do it. Not as good, maybe a little bit more control, but that's one that I also use. So as you can see, we're starting to remove material very easily, and creating that stake in the end. Another really powerful cutting way of achieving this is called the chest lever, or the chicken pull as some people call it, because you kind of look like a chicken when you're doing it. And again, this is one that feels weird for people at first, but if you can use this effectively, it's extremely useful, and it's a very powerful cut, and it's one that I use very, very often. And essentially what you're going to do is you're going to again take your knife and you're going to turn it backwards like this. Then you're going to put it to your chest. So it's kind of like back of your knife is kind of sitting in on your chest here. And again, this is something that I do when I'm testing a new knife, particularly when I'm doing reviews for knives and tools. I'll do this chest lever and see how comfortable that knife is to actually do that. On some knives, like this one here, this Enzo Trapper, the back is actually quite pointed at the end here. So when I go to do a chest lever, my chicken pull, this part's digging into my chest, so I would consider that not a very comfortable knife grip, knife handle rather, for doing this kind of thing. And also this little flare at the bottom here is digging into the palm of my hand when I'm holding it like this. So I would consider that not a very well designed handle for things like woodwork. So that's just one thing to bear in mind. But the companion, it's quite soft on the back and it's plastic, so actually with this little bit here it kind of rocks very comfortably in this position. So what we're going to do is we put it in here, our knife is backwards, take our stick, and we're going to keep our hands here, so all the energy is coming from your back muscles. You're not moving your hands out like this in any way. It might happen a little bit as you're working, but essentially where the power is coming from is this motion here. So again, it's quite a safe grip to be using, and it's a really good way of removing a lot of material. So what we can do is put our stick here, and then essentially all we're doing is just prying our arms apart. You can see here that I'm not moving my hands, it's all just like this sort of motion, just expanding your chest. And it's also quite an accurate way of removing material. So and as I said, it does feel strange at first, particularly to be holding your knife backwards essentially in your hand, but once you get used to that motion, you'll never look back. And we've created a stake point using that. So this one is a little bit, maybe a little bit more crude than our first one here, but hopefully if you've been going along with us, you've now understood how to make these. As I said, all of these notches I use quite often, and they are very useful, and they're good things to understand how to use. They're also a good way to test a knife out, to see the flexibility and the capabilities of that knife, as we said. So hopefully you've learned something from today's video. We will be back to you with another video very soon for knives and tools, but until then, get practicing these, and I would like to see your try sticks. So tag me at Pork Croak if you do end up making one of these try sticks, and I would love to see it, and I'll also share it. So yeah, just good luck with that, and we'll see you for another video very soon. Take care.